A divided federal appeals court has ruled that Donald Trump can federalize the Oregon National Guard and deploy troops to Portland. The Ninth Circuit panel voted 2-1, saying the president likely acted within his authority under a federal statute that permits using state guard units when regular forces cannot enforce federal law. The dissent warned that the decision weakens constitutional limits on federal power and threatens state control of militias. However, a separate district court order still blocks any actual troop movement while further appeals continue. Oregon and the city of Portland plan to request an en banc review, meaning the full Ninth Circuit would reconsider the ruling. Legal analysts say the case could become a major test of presidential authority in domestic law enforcement and may eventually reach the Supreme Court. The U.S. Army is exploring a plan to modernize its bases and logistics network through up to $150 billion in private equity investment. The proposal, still in its early stages, aims to address a major funding gap in military infrastructure without relying solely on congressional appropriations. Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent recently met with leading private equity and infrastructure firms, including Apollo, KKR, Carlyle, and Cerberus, to discuss potential partnerships. Projects under consideration include data centers on military land, rare earth processing facilities, and energy or logistics hubs that could be built through alternative financing models such as land swaps or service credits. Officials say the approach would bring commercial efficiency and innovation to critical defense facilities while preserving federal oversight. Analysts note, however, that such arrangements would raise complex regulatory and accountability questions before any agreements are finalized. The National Nuclear Security Administration has begun furloughing about 1,400 employees as the federal government shutdown continues with no sign of resolution. The agency, part of the Department of Energy, oversees the U.S. nuclear weapons stockpile and related security programs. Energy Secretary Chris Wright said roughly 400 federal employees will remain on duty to maintain essential safety and security functions, while thousands of contract workers continue supporting core nuclear operations. The furlough marks the first in the NNSA's history, triggered after carryover funds and emergency reserves were exhausted. Non-critical research, modernization, and construction projects are being paused, though officials emphasize that nuclear deterrence and facility safety remain fully staffed. Lawmakers from both parties have warned that prolonged disruptions could affect long-term readiness and modernization timelines. U.S. markets opened the week on cautious footing as investors balanced optimism over corporate earnings with growing political and global risks. The ongoing federal government shutdown is beginning to affect economic data releases and consumer confidence, while negotiations in Congress show limited progress. Earnings season is now in full swing, with major banks and tech companies posting mixed results. Strong reports from several large firms have supported equity indexes, but weaker guidance from others is fueling uncertainty about growth through year-end. At the same time, trade tensions between the U.S. and China are resurfacing. New export control measures and tariff discussions have raised concerns about potential impacts on manufacturing and global supply chains. Despite the headwinds, the S&P 500 and NASDAQ Composite remain near record levels, reflecting steady demand for technology shares and expectations that the Federal Reserve will maintain a cautious policy stance. Analysts say the next 2 weeks, as earnings, budget talks, and trade developments unfold, will be critical for setting the market's direction.